finance, for instance, land, right, has to be recorded at book value at all times.
Yes.
In accounting.
Right. So what I'm asking you to do is to think abstractly in terms of the cash flows themselves. I haven't talked about accounting practices at all. I'm going to come back to how we actually implement this, and at that point it'll be important to bring in the accounting elements. But for now, let's set them aside. Okay? So these are actual cash flows that you will receive at different points in time. And by the way, I want you to use this exact same framework for analyzing accounting practices, because financial analysis can actually be used to ask the question, are accounting conventions good or bad? Some accounting conventions are favorable, some are unfavorable, but the only way to analyze them is by using this kind of a framework first. Okay? So I would argue that this will be certainly useful for looking at accounting practices, but it won't necessarily be the same. So you'll need to have to make that distinction. Okay. So far, nothing I've said is all that controversial, I don't think. I've simply defined that there's a value operator. Operator means function. You stick in a sequence of cash flows, out pops a number. And when you analyze the value of an asset, I want you to always draw a timeline and make sure you understand the sequence of cash flows. Okay? Without the timeline, I don't know that you really understand what's going on. So first of all, as a tip for your midterm and final exams, anytime you have a calculation, which you have to do a present value or valuation exercise, I want to see this. I want to see that you know when things are going to happen. Because 9 out of 10 times when you make a mistake in valuation, it's because you lined this up incorrectly. Okay. Now, what is V? Well, we said that one example of a V is the market. But is that objective? Is it subjective? Does it work well? How is value determined? And what we're going to do in this lecture and the next one is to take apart this function V in the case of no uncertainty. So remember I told you the two important factors in financial analysis that makes finance interesting and exciting is time and uncertainty. Right. And we've seen both of those things happen this weekend. A lot of time has passed in resolving the uncertainty with regard to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. What I'd like to do is to abstract from the uncertainty part. For the next couple of lectures, there's no uncertainty, okay? I'm going to get rid of the randomness. And I'm only going to focus on figuring out the value operator, this V sub t function, for cases where we have cash flows at different points in time, but where the cash flows are known for sure. So there's no uncertainty about whether they're going to happen or not happen, okay? After we do that, after we do the no uncertainty case for which we have a complete solution, I will then come back and introduce uncertainty in a somewhat more natural way. And then we're going to focus on valuation with uncertainty as well. Okay. So let me start with the perfect certainty case about how to figure out what this V sub t is. And I'm going to start with a very simple example that has to do with manipulating cash flows. And I'm going to talk in particular about foreign currencies. So I want to ask you, what happens when you add 150 yen to 300 pounds? What do you get when you add those two? 150 yen plus 300 pounds is equal to 450, what? $450? If you believe that, please see me after class, and we'll need to do some transactions. Well, look, obviously 450 makes no sense, right? It's like, you know, adding your weight to your age. That number might be interesting, but there's no interpretation for it, right? So 150 and 300, you would never add those two and talk about 450 what, right? You don't even have a unit to be able to ascribe to it. Well, that natural reaction that you have, that natural aversion you have to adding up dollars or yen and in different currencies, I want you to develop that exact same attitude towards cash flows at different points in time. So let me continue on with this. Obviously, if you want to add the two, you know that you have to convert them to the same currency, right? So 300 pounds converts to a certain number of yen, and so when you add that up, you get 46,050 yen. Or if you want to convert it to pounds, it converts to 300.98 pounds sterling, right? Those numbers make sense. The reason they make sense is because they're in the same units. So apples to apples is the familiar adage that we use, right? You can't add apples to oranges. Actually, in theory, you could, right? You could make fruit salad, and you need apples and oranges and pears and all that. But for argument's sake, when it comes to money, it really doesn't tell you much that you've got 450 blah. You need to have a set of units. Well, it turns out that this actual analysis requires that we pick a base currency. We pick what's called a numeraire. A numeraire is a unit of account or a standard by which we measure everything. Okay? So either yen or pounds will work just fine. It doesn't matter which. If you're a British investor, you might care about pounds. If you're a Japanese investor, you might care more about yen. It just depends upon your perspective, but either one will do for the purposes of analyzing how much money you have at a point in time. Well, that exact same exercise has to be applied to money today versus money tomorrow, because those two things are not the same. It's like yen and pounds. They're not the same. They can't buy the same things. They aren't used in the same way. They have different markets. The markets are related, but they're different. So once you know the exchange rate and once you pick a base currency, you can combine the thing. The same idea holds true for cash flows at different points in time. Cash flows at different points in time are like different currencies. In order to add them together, you've got to use the appropriate exchange rates, okay? Once you do, then all of the valuation that we're going to conduct over the next couple of lectures becomes absolutely trivial. So let me give you an example of that. Here's my timeline. And my timeline has payoffs at various different dates. Now, I'm arguing that the past and the future cannot be combined without converting them. So we have to have a set of exchange rates that convert all the various different currencies into a numeraire or single base currency. And for the sake of argument, I'm going to just pick times 0 dollars today as my base currency. So in other words, I want to convert every cash flow into the single currency that is today's dollars. Okay? So in particular, over the course of T days, days 1 through T, how many different currencies do I have apart from my base currency of times 0 money? Yeah, I've got T different currencies, T dates. Every single date, it's a different currency. And I need to convert them in order to add them up. Okay? So I'm going to argue that the cash flow, the sequence of cash flows, CF1, CF2, ... if I want to figure out what it's worth in a single currency, date 0 currency, I've got to multiply the cash flows by the appropriate exchange rate. What's the exchange rate? The exchange rate is how many dollars at date 1 per dollar at date 0. How many dollars at date 2 per date $0. How many dollars at date 3 per date $0, and so on. I'll have T exchange rates for the T different kinds of currencies that I have. Each currency is dollars denominated as of a particular date. Any questions about that? Pretty straightforward? You think it's straightforward, but you're going to have to think about it for a little while and do some problems to really make sure you appreciate this perspective. All right? Now, we're ready to talk about what this value operator is. I'm going to argue that once you've got the exchange rates across the various different currencies, then the value of the collection of cash flows is just the sum of all of the values of the cash flows denominated in the same currency. But instead of currency meaning pounds or dollars or yen, the currency is going to be date zero dollars. Okay? Questions about this? This is important now. So I'm going to define something called the net present value operator, NPV, as the date zero value of the cash flows. Now, why is this called net present value? Because typically, when you are valuing an investment, you have to pay some money up front, and then you get cash flows later on. And so your net investment is going to be given by some summation of those pieces. But it's not a simple sum. You can't just add the numbers. That would be like adding 300 yen to 150 pounds or whatever. You have to figure out how to convert all the currencies to the same unit of account, dollars today. And so that's why it's called present value. It's the value at the present today. And the reason it's net is you're netting out any initial investment, which is the cash flow at time zero. Okay? So V sub 0 is equal to CF0. Notice there's no exchange rate because we're doing it in today's dollars. So that's the base currency. Plus the cash flow tomorrow multiplied by the exchange rate between dollars tomorrow and dollars today, and so on. If there's an initial investment, then the initial cash flow is negative. That just means you have to put money in to the project or the investment. And then over the course of the next T periods, you get cash flows, which could also be positive or negative, and you have to convert them into today's dollars. And once you do, you look at that number, and you see whether or not you like it. That's the value, the net present value of the cash flows. Now, I have one unanswered question for you. What's the unanswered question in all of this analysis? Sounds good, right? This is pretty simple stuff. But I pulled something out of the air. What did I pull out of the air?
The exchange rate.
Exactly. Exactly. Where do I get the exchange rates? You should be asking me, where do you get the exchange rates? And you know what I'm going to tell you? What's the answer I'm going to give you? Where do I get the exchange rates? From the market. Exactly. From the market. I get it from the market. How do I get it from the market? Well, we did it last time. You know how. We're going to auction it off. You want to see how? I've got a security that pays $1 a year from today. It pays $1 a year from today. Who will offer me a penny for that piece of paper? Who will offer me 50 cents for that piece of paper? 75 cents, 80 cents, 90 cents, 95 cents, 97 cents, 98 cents. Well, all right, 97 cents to the dollar. There you go. That's the exchange rate right there. We're done. By the way, I appreciate that. That's a lot of confidence in my credit worthiness. It's only a 3% discount. All right, well, that's the exchange rate between today and next year. What about today and 5 years from now? Where do we get that from? Exactly, the market. Okay, I've got a piece of paper, it pays $1 5 years from now. How many people will pay me a penny for that? We'll go through the whole motion and come up with the same kind of process, and we'll get a number. So the market. Now, in a few weeks, we're going to have to question whether or not that is a good way of getting the exchange rates. I'm not going to talk about that just yet, but that's where we get it from. Okay? So I've begged the question a little bit, but I think I've actually made some progress in providing a framework to think about valuation. Once we establish the exchange rates, you will agree with me that I can value any any cash flow whatsoever, where the cash flow payments are known with certainty in advance, right? So that's a pretty impressive achievement in the space of 45 minutes, right? We've actually figured out how to value any cash flow whatsoever under perfect certainty given the exchange rates. And I've told you where to get the exchange rate from. You get them from the marketplace. That's why financial markets are so important. It's because we require those inputs into our valuation process for doing the analysis. We rely on financial markets. If financial markets didn't exist, we can't do this. I'd have to wave my hands and say, well, you can get it from some kind of theoretical source. You just make it up. Just come up with some numbers. That doesn't sound very compelling, and in fact, it's not. The power of financial markets is the wisdom of the crowds, and like it or not, you're the wisdom that we're tapping on. You know, we're tapping your wisdom to come up with these exchange rates. Okay. So we know now that the value of a sequence of cash flows is simply equal to today's dollars when you discount, when you use these exchange rates to convert them to present dollars, dollars today. And that's often called present value. Notice that these exchange rates are sometimes called discount factors. The reason they're called discount factors is because typically they are numbers that are less than 1, like what we saw today. $1 next year, I was able to auction off for 97 cents today. That number is smaller than $1 because people are impatient. $1 today is worth more than $1 next year. So if I promise you $1 next year, you're only willing to pay me a little bit less than that for that privilege, okay? So it's a discount over what it would be on the day that it gets paid. Yes?
What exactly are you discounting if there's perfect certainty? Like my patient?
That's a great question. Let me repeat it for everybody to hear. The question is, what are you discounting if there's no uncertainty? Why should $1 next year be worth less than $1 today? Because there's no uncertainty. I've ruled out uncertainty, right? So there's no default risk. It's impatience. People want to consume now versus later. And therefore, if you're going to force somebody to consume later, you've got to somehow offer them some incentive to do that. So in order for me to have you give me $1 so that I can take the $1 now, and I'll pay you back a year from now so that you can't consume that $1 today. You have to wait a year to consume that $1. In order for me to do that, I actually have to make it interesting for you, which means you give me 97 cents now, and I give you back $1 next year. I pay you extra for that time that you have to wait. Yeah.
Could you also make an argument that I could take my $1 now and give it to somebody who needs to use it now and charge him for the primitive usage of my $1 now? So
Absolutely. Absolutely. We haven't talked about the mechanism for determining what that exchange rate is, and I'm going to come to that. But before we even talk about that, I want to acknowledge that it exists, and it's real, and we can figure out what it is just from a simple auction, a market, and we can use it, okay? But I'm going to get to exactly what it means and how we arrive at those exchange rates. That's going to be a very important part of this.
For inflation, we know that because of inflation, $1 today is also worth less than $1 next year, for example.
That's right. I'm going to get to that at the end of this lecture. That's another reason why there might be some kind of discounting. It's not just the time preference.
That's part of the answer.
That's right. Exactly. Yep. So we're going to come back to that as well.
Is there such thing as a deflationary environment?
Deflation can occur. Negative real interest rates can occur during certain unusual periods of economic development. So that's a possibility. It's not a possibility that we've seen in the United States in recent years, but other countries have experienced that. And when that happens, there's some really serious repercussions. So we're going to come to that. In fact, in 2004, the US government early on in that year was very concerned about the possibility of deflation. And it was only towards the end of 2005 that inflation became more of a concern. So we're going to come to that as well.
Would you separate the concept of inflation from the time value of money? Would you call those two different
fundamental concept.
Yes, I would. And let's hold off on inflation for now because I don't want people to get confused by it. It's something I'm going to bring in at the very end. All right, so I will come back to that. That is a topic for lectures 2 and 3. Okay, so we now know how to value cash flows, at least using this very simple framework with exchange rates. And here's an example, just a very, very simple one, where I've got the two discount rates or exchange rates for next year and the year after. It's 90 cents to the dollar and 80 cents to the dollar. Notice that the farther you go into the future, the more of a discount these exchange rates require. That's also human nature having to do with impatience and possibly inflation and other kinds of phenomenon. But and again, I'm not going to tell you how we got those numbers. I got them from the marketplace, okay? Now, what's the net present value of a project requiring a current investment of $10 million with cash flows of $5 million in year 1 and 7 in year 2? That's trivial, right? Here you go. Minus 10 million today, 5 million next year, but next year's dollars is not the same as today's dollars, so you got to convert it to the right currency. So that's 90 cents to the dollar multiplied by 5, and then 80 cents to the dollar multiplied by 7. When you add it up, you get 100,000 of today's dollars. That's what this investment is worth. So the first question is, should you take this investment? Is it a good project? Well, let me ask you, do you want $100,000? Yeah, if you don't, again, see me afterwards. I will help you with this problem. Remember the first day I told you that once you figure out valuation, management is trivial? Well, I wasn't just kidding. This is an example. What we've been able to do is to take a problem. What's the net present value of a project requiring this sequence of cash flows? We've been able to take that problem, that management problem, should you do this or not? We've been able to reduce that to a simple question. Do you want $100,000? I think the answer is yes. So that's the management part, okay? Let's do this. Done. The valuation part is the hard part. The management part, the decision is easy once you have the right numbers in front of you. Second question, suppose a buyer wishes to purchase this project but pay for it 2 years from now. How much should you ask for this project? Now, the first thing you need to do is what? Well, that's the second thing. The first thing you need to do, draw a timeline, okay? Draw a timeline so you know exactly what's going on. 2 years from now, is that next year? Or is that 2 years from today? So draw a timeline, and you can figure out, once you have the timeline, what the present values and future values are, okay? So when you work out the numbers, you can actually make a decision and figure out exactly what you ought to charge for that. Okay. That's it for the time value of money, but I want to summarize by telling you what we've learned so far. We've learned that we can value cash flows, assets, which are sequences of cash flows. And the way we value that is by making some implicit assumptions. The assumptions are, we know the cash flows in advance, so there's no uncertainty about what the cash flows are. Second, we know the exchange rates. And if you don't know them, go get them. Where do you get them? You get them from the marketplace, okay? And finally, there are no frictions in the currency conversions. One thing you didn't ask me about is that typically, when you go abroad and you have to convert your currencies, what do you have to do? You have to find somebody that converts it for you, and typically they will charge you a fee for that conversion, right? I've been talking as if the conversions happen without any kind of frictions. That's an assumption that can be tested. So we're going to talk about frictions later in the course. But for now, we're going to assume that there are no frictions, okay? Now, of course, these are all hypotheticals. They're all approximations to a much more complex reality. But once we understand how the model works with these simplifying assumptions, we can then go back and say, okay, let's make the assumptions more realistic, and let's see how that affects the implications. So I'm going to first do the plain vanilla version of this, and then after we fully understand it, I'm going to come back and make this more complex. Okay? So until lecture 12, that's a long ways away, but until lecture 12, I'm going to assume that these assumptions hold. And after lecture 12, I'm going to go back and systematically question and expand and revise each one of these. So when I told you during the first day of class that you can't handle the truth, this is what I mean. We're going to start simple and try to understand the implications of these simplistic assumptions, and then little by little we're going to make the assumptions closer to the truth. Okay? Now, more examples. Once we understand how this exchange rate mechanism works, we can look at all sorts of other alternatives to calculating value. So in particular, one question that you might ask, that was asked, is $1 today should be worth more than $1 in the future because of impatience, because of inflation, because of all the reasons we described. But the bottom line is supply and demand. More people want money today than money tomorrow. And so supply and demand, bottom line, dictates that there is this difference between the two. So we can actually figure out what that difference is by looking at the exchange rates. So in particular, $1 in year 0, if you hold it for a year, it'll turn into $1 times something, the reverse of the exchange rate of $1 in year 1 brought back to year 0. But I'm going to write it in this format, 1 plus something. Because remember, when we're going the other way, when we have $1 in year 1 and we want to figure out what is it worth in today's dollars, that's a discount, right? It's a number less than 1. So if you want to go the opposite direction, if I have $1 today and I want to know how much is that dollar worth a year from now, it should be greater than 1. In fact, it should be the reciprocal of the exchange rate going the other way, right? Instead of looking at pounds, you look at yen. And so it's the opposite of the same exchange rate. But the way I'm going to write it is 1 plus r, because it'll be greater than 1 typically. So r will be a number typically greater than 0. What about for 2 years? I'm going to simply write it as 1 plus r quantity squared. And the reason I do that is because I'm thinking about taking that same growth rate and applying it 2 years in a row. Okay, I could have written 1 plus z, and z then would be the rate of growth over a 2-year period, but I like to think in terms of annual frequencies. So I'm going to just simply assume that a year is my unit of account, and then looking at a 1-year, 2-year, 3-year kind of growth period, I'm going to simply take powers of this factor 1 plus r. Okay? So $1 in year 0 is going to be worth $1 times 1 plus r to the tth power in year t. This r is often called the opportunity cost of capital. In fact, there are like 5 different names for this r. It's called the interest rate. It's called the growth rate. It's called the cost of capital. It's called the opportunity cost of capital. John Maynard Keynes called it the user cost. There are tons of names for this quantity, but the basic idea is it's the reverse of the exchange rates that we were looking at before when we were trying to bring everything to today's dollars. Now, the reason I'm showing this to you is because it turns out that we're going to want to move money back and forth through time. And in order to do that, we need to sometimes multiply and sometimes divide. And I want to come up with just one set of notation as opposed to all these exchange rates floating around. So remember when we had t periods, and I wanted to figure out what the value of an asset was today given t periods, we had to have t exchange rates. That's a pain in the neck to carry around t numbers. And moreover, there are exchange rates that you have to deal with between dates t plus k and t plus j. So any 2 dates, you got to have an exchange rate between them. So pretty soon, the number of exchange rates you got to keep in your head is ridiculous, right? That's why they came up with the euro, right? To try to unify some of these exchange rates. So here is a way to unify all of the exchange rates into one number, little r. Once you know little r, you know everything. You know all the exchange rates for every possible 2 dates that you care about. Now, where do we get little r from? Exactly. You're learning. So we get it from the market. Now, it's going to be a little bit more complicated than that. It turns out that the market's going to give us many different r's. So we're not going to get to that yet. So for now, let's just assume that the market gives us one r, this r. Once you have this one number, r, it will allow you to do all of these calculations back and forth. You can move money back and forth through time because you will know what the exchange rate is between any 2 points in your cash flow sequence. Okay. Now that we have the r, let's go back and figure out what the exchange rates are. What we were talking about in terms of bringing stuff back to date 0. Okay? And it turns out that there's a really simple form. It turns out that $1 in year 1, if you paid me $1 in year 1, and I wanted to figure out what it was worth today, given this r number that I used, it's actually just equal to $1 divided by 1 plus r. So what's the exchange rate? What's that? That's not the exchange rate. What's the exchange rate that allows us to take $1 next year and bring it to $1 today? It's 1 over 1 plus r. 1 over 1 plus r. Remember, r is a number greater than 0. So 1 over 1 plus r is a number less than 1, like 97 cents to the dollar. So the exchange rate between next year's dollar and today's dollar is 1 over 1 plus r. What about the exchange rate between $1 2 years from now and today? What is that? 1 over 1 plus r squared. That's right. And so on. So the exchange rates or discount factors are simply related to the little r's in this manner. Okay? That's the mechanics and mathematics of present value. Now, this might seem intuitive, and when I say it, you might understand it, or you might think you do. Please go back between today and Wednesday, go over this, and test yourself. You know, try to figure out for a given r, if you have $100 today, and r is 7%, what is $100 worth 3 years from now? Or if you have $180 3 years from now, and you want to figure out what it's going to be worth not 3 years from now, but a year from now, and the r is 8%, what is it equal to? Test yourself by coming up with little examples to challenge your own understanding of this concept, because it's going to be critical. We have to get this right because everything that we build from here on in is going to rest on the foundations of these calculations. Okay. Now, with these r's, I'm going to leave you with this one last concept, which is that the value of the cash flows that we've been talking about at time 0 is simply equal to the cash flows multiplied by the exchange rates. And now with this definition of little r, this opportunity cost of capital, this interest rate, this discount rate, we then have an expression for what this value operator ought to be. Right? Using this expression, any cash flow in the world can be valued under perfect certainty and under the assumptions that we described. Any cash flow can be valued. Therefore, any asset can be valued. So what we've done in the space of a lecture is to create a valuation operator that works for virtually anything under the sun in certain simplified circumstances. That's a major achievement. You can congratulate yourself that we've reached this level. But we're going to have to do some more work to think about how to use this. So we're not done yet. We have some additional analysis to do, but this is a wonderful starting point. Next time, we're going to focus on how to take this and apply it to 2 very, very special cash flows, an annuity and a perpetuity. And you know what this is going to do? This is going to allow you to figure out what your mortgage payments are every month when you go apply for a mortgage. You'd be surprised at how subtle that calculation is and how many bankers don't know how to do it. Well, you will. All right? I'll see you next time.